How do and or act with non-boolean values? I'm trying to learn Python and came across some code that is nice and short but doesn't totally make sense. The context was, I get what it's doing, but why does Python do this? You return the value rather than true/false. Returns 5. Similarly, changing the and to or will result in a change in functionality. So, would return 10. Is this legit/reliable style, or are there any gotchas on this?
Dear. We start by summarizing the to behavior of the two logical operators and or. These idioms will form the basis of our discussion below. And. Return the first falsy value if there are any, else return the last value in the expression. Or. Return the first truthy value if there are any, else return the last value in the expression. The behavior is also summarized in the docs, especially in this table. The only operator returning a Boolean value regardless of its operands is the not operator. Truthiness and truthy evaluations. The statement is a very concise and arguably less readable way of saying if args is not empty, return the result of max args, min args, otherwise return 0. In general, it is a more concise representation of an if-else expression. For example, should roughly translate to or equivalently. Similarly, should roughly translate to or equivalently. Where exp1 and exp2 are arbitrary Python objects, or expressions that return some object. The key to understanding the uses of the logical and or operators here is understanding that they are not restricted to operating on, or returning Boolean values. Any object with a truthiness value can be tested here. This includes int, str, list, dict, tuple, set, none type, and user-defined objects. Short-circuiting rules still apply as well. But what is truthiness? It refers to how objects are evaluated when used in conditional expressions. At Patrick Howell summarizes truthiness nicely in this post. All values are considered truthy except for the following, which are falsy. None false 0, 0.0, 0j decimal 0, fraction 0, 1, comma an empty list. Comma an empty dict, an empty tuple, an empty strb, an empty byte set, an empty set, an empty range, like range 0. Objects for which obj._ball_ returns false, obj._len_ returns 0. A truthy value will satisfy the check performed by if or while statements. We use truthy and falsy to differentiate from the-ball values true and false. How and works. We build on ops question as a segue into a discussion on how these operators in these instances. Given a function with the definition How do I return the difference between the minimum and maximum valuing a list of 0 or more arguments? Finding the minimum and maximum is easy. Use the inbuilt functions. The only snag here is appropriately handling the corner case where the argument list could be empty, for example, calling foo. We can do both in a single line thanks to the AND operator. Since AND is used, the second expression must also be evaluated if the first is true. Note that, if the first expression is evaluated to be truthy, the return value is always the result of the second expression. If the first expression is evaluated to be falsy, then the result returned is the result of the first expression. In the function above, if foo receives one or more arguments, len args is greater than 0, a positive number, so the result returned is max args, min args. Oto, if no arguments are passed, len args is 0, which is falsy, and 0 is returned. Note that an alternative way to write this function would be, or, more concisely, of course, none of these functions perform any type checking, so unless you completely trust the input provided, do not rely on the simplicity of these constructs. How OR works. I explained the working of OR in a similar fashion with a contrived example. Given a function with the definition, how would you complete foo to return all numbers over 9,000? We use OR to handle the corner case here. We define foo as foo performs a filtration on the list to retain all numbers over 9,000. If there exist any such numbers, the result of the list comprehension is a non-empty list which is truthy, so it is returned, short-circuiting in action here. If there exist no such numbers, then the result of the list comp is, which is falsy. So the second expression is now evaluated, a non-empty string, and is returned. Using conditionals, we could rewrite this function as as before. This structure is more flexible in terms of error handling.
Quoting from Python docs. Note that neither a nor or restrict the value and type they return to false and true, but rather return the last evaluated argument. This is sometimes useful. For example, if s is a string that should be replaced by a default value if it is empty, the expression s or foo yields the desired value. So, this is how Python was designed to evaluate the Boolean expressions, and the above documentation gives us an insight of why they did it so. To get a Boolean value, just typecast it. Why? Short-circuiting. For example, the same goes for OR too, that is, it will return the expression which is truthy as soon as it finds it, cause evaluating the rest of the expression is redundant. Instead of returning hardcore true or false, Python returns truthy or falsy, which are anyway going to evaluate to true or false. You could use the expression as is, and it will still work. To know what's truthy and falsy, check Patrick Hawes' answer.
AND and OR perform Boolean logic, but they return one of the actual values when they are comparing. When using AND, values are evaluated in a Boolean context from left to right. 0, and none are false in a Boolean context, everything else is true. If all values are true in a Boolean context, and returns the last value. If any value is false in a Boolean context and returns the first false value. So the code returns the value of max args, min args when there is args, else it returns len args, which is 0.
Is this legit/reliable style, or are there any gotchas on this? This is legit. It is a short circuit evaluation where the last value is returned. You provide a good example. The function will return 0 if no arguments are passed, and the code doesn't have to check for a special case of no arguments passed. Another way to use this, is to default none arguments to a mutable primitive, like an empty list. If some non-truthy value is passed to a list, it defaults to an empty list, handy way to avoid an if statement and the mutable default argument pitfall.
If you want to see more, please consider subscribing.